Okay, I've got here a sample neckline that I've knitted in preparation to demonstrate how to pick up stitches to give you a very neat finish. The neckline is constructed of several sections. When you start knitting a round neckline, you've got the stitches at the bottom, which I prefer to put onto a stitch holder, although some patterns will tell you to cast them off. You then have a shaped section, which is between these two stitch markers on either side, where in this case I've worked the decreases 2 stitches in from the edge so that it gives me a nice neat line of stitches to pick up through, and I also use paired decreases. So on this side I'm using knit 2 together, and on the other side I'm using a slip 1 knit 1 pass slip stitch over decrease, so that the decreases lean in the same direction as the knitting is decreasing. And then the last section of the neckline is from the orange markers up to the top, which would be the shoulder point, which is straight section. The reason for identifying the different sections is that when you come to pick up the stitches, as I'm going to demonstrate in a minute, you need to pick them up at different rates in the different sections. So I'm now going to start picking up my stitches, and I'm using a circular needle just because I prefer to work on circular needles. You can do this on straight needles as well, but I'm just going to turn the knitting around so that the edge where I'm going to start, which is the top of the left hand side, is where I'm going to start picking up stitches. And what you want to do is you want to be at the top of the edge, but you want to work between the edge stitch and the next stitch in the gap between those 2 stitches. So I'm going to be picking up down the same line all the way around the neckline. And to help you see more clearly what I'm doing, I'm using a contrast colour. So I've picked up 1 stitch, and then this is the row below, so I'm going to pick up another stitch, and I also at this point, just because I'm using another yarn, I'm going to twist the ends over each other just to secure it, and then I'm going to pick up a stitch in the next row. So I've picked up 3 stitches so far, and as I'm going down the straight section I need to pick up 3 stitches for every 4 rows. If I picked up stitches for every row, I'd have too many stitches in this section and you'd find the neckband would flare out. So I'm going to miss the next row and pick up another 3 stitches, 1 for each row. That's 2, 3, and then I'm going to miss the next row. And that brings us to one of the orange stitch markers. So the orange stitch marker marks the start or the top of the decrease section. In this section you have to pick up the stitches at a slightly different rate. Because the decrease is a diagonal line rather than a straight vertical line, it makes that edge longer than the straight edge. So from the orange marker down to the blue marker, which is the straight shaped section, I'm going to pick up 1 stitch for every row. So if I just take the marker out, I'm now going to pick up 1 stitch for every row down this section. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I'm getting near the bottom, so I need to work out where I want to stop picking up the stitches. So in fact I've got 1 more, because that was the row where the first decrease was made, so I've got to pick up 1 more stitch here. So at the moment I've picked up 6 stitches along the straight section, and then I've picked up 7 stitches down the shaped section. And it's important to make a note of that so that when we do the second half of the neckline we pick up the stitches at the same rate. We've now got to the bottom of the neckline and I'm now going to pick up or move the stitches from the stitch holder onto the other end of my needle. So you just need to slide them off the stitch holder back onto your free needle, like that. So if I just move that out of the way. So I've now come to the bottom of the neckline. At this point, again, a lot of people have a problem because they find a hole appears between the pickup on the shaped section and the stitches on the stitch holder. And this is where the little blue marker comes into play. I've put the blue thread marker onto the strand of yarn that runs between the stitches that were on a hold and the last stitch worked on the shape section. So if you actually pick up that loop onto your left needle, I'm taking the loop off, it's the same method as you would if you were doing a make one. And now I'm going to knit that stitch, that loop, through the back of the stitch because it'll twist it and close up the stitch. So I have made a stitch, but that stitch, which is a loop that's twisted, closes up the hole that sometimes appears. So we can now carry on knitting across the stitches that were on the stitch holder. I prefer to keep them on a stitch holder rather than casting them off, because with a round neckline it's very close fitting often and you want to keep the neckline as flexible as possible. So I've now got to the other side of my stitches. I'm just going to reorganise my yarn. Now got to the other side of my stitches, so I now have to do the reverse of what I've previously done on the first side. So the first thing I need to do is, again, taking my spare needle, I'm going to pick up that strand that is between the stitch holder stitches and the shaped section, and again knit into the back of the loop to make a stitch and twist it shut. Don't worry if it's because you've increased stitches. You can always adjust the number of stitches on the next row when you come to actually starting to work the neckline. So I'm now back to picking up stitches from my edge, and again you want to make sure that you're just working one stitch between the first and second stitch on the edge to get the same line as you had on the first side of your neckline. It is very important to make sure you match things on each side. So I'm going to look for the first row, which is there, and I'm going to go between that stitch and the next one. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and I've now got to the marker which was marking the top of my shaping, which will give me my 7th stitch, which matches the other side. I'm going to take the stitch marker out and discard it. Now when we work the first side, I finish by doing 3 and then miss a row. So when I start up here, I'm going to miss that first row and then start picking up 1 stitch for every row for 3. And then again I'm going to miss this next row and then pick up another 3. So that should give me the same number of stitches on each side of my neckline. If I just pull it onto the cord, you can now see that I've got the same number of stitches on each side, and hopefully you can also see a very nice neat edge here. So the next point would be you can either knit a row of garter stitch, so a knit row, work a knit row back, and you can at that point adjust any numbers of stitches that you want, so you could decrease the stitches either side where you made the make ones if you want. That also gives you a nice little garter stitch ridge which sits down over the pickup and again helps to make it look neat, and then go into your neckline neckband pattern, which could be a rib or moss stitch, or it could still be garter stitch. Or you can go straight into your neckline pattern. I just want to show you a couple of garments with two different neckline finishes, just to show you how well this edge works. So this first garment, hopefully you can see, again it's been knitted in a 4-ply, so a very fine yarn, but I've still got a nice neat pick-up edge all the way around this section here. Again, my decreases are 2 stitches out in from the edge, which gives you a nice finishing detail. And in this example I did work 1 row of garter stitch before I went into a knit 1 purl 1 rib. It gives a nice edge, it doesn't disturb the pattern very much, so it works very well. So that's an example where I've used a knit 1 purl 1 rib, and it does still have a nice lot of flexibility in the neckline. And then in this second garment, again you've still got the very nice neat edge between the neckline shaping and where the band has been picked up. Again we've got the paired decreases worked 2 stitches in, and in this one I went straight into a knit 2 purl 2 rib to give just as neat a finish as the first one. So hopefully that will help you to make your necklines look lovely and neat. Bye for now.